Happy Valentine's Day, everyone, and welcome to the new show by Amy Newshore, the Let's Talk Relationship Show. My name is Bella Levavi. I will be the host tonight. So, Amy, can you tell me about who you are and how you got into this field?
So the field is working with couples, and since I've been 16, I've been really intrigued by relationships, probably because I didn't see too many good ones around. And I remember reading a lot of books, and they were more about psychology and stuff, and I had a dream to work with couples, and that kind of went underground for a few decades, actually. So I worked in human services for a while, Big Brothers Big Sisters, Families in Crisis, and I decided that, and I worked also with inmates in 3 state prisons where I pretty much created classes where they got college credit for, on relationships, communication, that kind of stuff, and it was really wonderful. But that grant ended, as well as other grants in my previous jobs. So one day I decided I can't just have this instability where I'm like putting myself into these great jobs and then they end, whatever. So I decided I'm going to go back, get my second master's, I have one in education, and be a counselor. So I went to Antioch, New England, and in Keene, and I loved what I was learning, but I had this gnawing feeling that I didn't really want to be a therapist, even though I was studying that, because I didn't really want to work one-on-one, and I actually didn't know there was a specialty in couples therapy. But during my internship, I had the privilege and blessing to work at a couples center for 2 years, and I fell in love with working with the dynamics between people, helping them find their way back to each other. So that's really my story around finally finding my place in my life, my calling.
Amazing.
So, yeah, so glad.
Well, we're really excited to start this show. So I understand that you mostly work with individual couples, but then you also have a newspaper column in the Gazette and the Recorder, and then now you're trying to start this television show. So can you tell me about why you're trying to spread the word just beyond the couples that you work with?
Right. Okay, so when you ask that, I think of my mom. She inspired me from a very young age to believe in myself and to really contribute to the world, particularly in my own unique way. And that's what I've done through my life. For 10 years, I taught classes through colleges that were no credit, but it was all about being single and what to look for in a relationship. So I did that for about 10 years. And I just kind of do my own thing a lot, and a lot of it comes from her inspiration. So that's pretty much what has been my motivation, and she gave me a lot of confidence to be able to just create things that maybe never happened before. So, of course, people have their own TV shows. It's something I had not thought of until I bumped into you a few months ago, and somehow we got to talking, and we birthed it right there. And the main reason I want to is to branch out beyond what I already do to reach people who don't really get exposed to information, even basic information about how to talk to each other, whatever, and they may be stuck in patterns for even decades. So I just want to be available to bring on more information into the world. And also, a lot of it for me is social engagement, meaning people from the community, couples that I've worked with. I want them to have a voice, and mostly the focus will be a lot on my guests. And that's pretty much why I want to do this.
Amazing. So let's get into it.
Okay. So I'm going to introduce my wonderful guests. These are actually couples that I work with, and they are willing to be here with me and share their experience and their thoughts. I've watched them grow. We've been working together for a while, and this is our first time, all of us. So we're in this together, and I couldn't imagine better people to be joining me today. So what I'd like to do is have you share what your name is, where you live, and maybe a fun fact about your relationship. Okay, so anyone can start?
We can go first. My name's Mariah.
I'm Christian.
And we live in Natick, Massachusetts. And a fun fact about our relationship is that we actually met last March. And in a very short time period, we met, we got engaged, we bought a house, and we got married. So we just got married in November. The day we got married was actually the 8-month mark from our first date. So we got married exactly 8 months after we met. So everything's been pretty fast.
Awesome. Okay.
All right. So my name is Skylar.
I'm Christina.
And a fun fact about us would probably be we actually knew each other for a long time before we started dating. And one time we went to the beach in early May, and we just jumped in the water and it was freezing cold. But that's kind of like how we fell in love. And so our tradition every year on our anniversary in early May, like the first week, is that we go to the ocean and jump in the water together.
And we're from Greenfield. Oh, we live in Greenfield right now. We're not from Greenfield.
I didn't know about that fun fact about how you met. All right.
I didn't know he was going to share that.
So I think I'd like to start off with asking each of you to think of a word or two that comes up for you when you think of the word partnership. And maybe you can just put that in your mind and take a turn and just share what that would be. Like, what comes up for you? It's kind of a big, there's a lot we can say about partnership, which is what we're going to be doing today. But what comes up for you when you think of that word partnership? Why don't we start with you, Mariah?
Sure. The first word that comes to mind for me is participation. So partnership is like equal participation in things on like a daily basis and a hourly basis and a minute-to-minute by basis.
And the word that comes to mind for me is communication, because any partnership, big or small, requires, that understanding between two separate people.
Got it.
Team is what I think of.
And for me, it would be respect. You have to equally respect each other and acknowledge that you guys are, like Christina said, working as a team. So everything you do it together.
We're pretty much saying the same thing, aren't we? It's wonderful. So my next question is, I find that all the couples that have come to me, and all the couples I know and hear about, all have one main challenge that they face, and they all come in with this problem, this issue. And they may express it in different ways, but if I was to ask you each, what do you think that particular issue is that is so common, so challenging, very difficult, and pretty universal? What do you think that might be? So we can go around again if you like. Why don't we start with you, Skylar?
Sure. Yeah, I would definitely say miscommunications is communication is the big umbrella term for it, but the miscommunications are what cause all the issues and hardships in a relationship.
I love that word because we miss each other when we're not communicating well. So that's kind of a cool way of saying the problem, really, yes. And how about for you?
I was going to say communication.
Okay. And I'm sure we could all relate, right? And how about for you? Chris?
Again, going back to the communication, I totally agree.
Okay, and these did bubble up for you, right? This is what you came up with. And how about you?
Yeah, definitely. I would echo what Sky said of like miscommunication, which falls under the umbrella of communication.
That's right, and we're going to be actually talking about that today. So I'm glad I asked you and that you're really on board. And that's what we're going to get into, one particular type of communication that's most challenging, or one of the most challenging ones, but I'll save that for a minute. So I have written down here a few things that couples who come to me first tell me. And so it really is about communication, but I just want to read them. So I've heard people say we have communication problems, there's a breakdown in communication, we fight a lot, sometimes we fight every day, all the time. Our conversations go nowhere. We only discuss logistics like kids, money, or household tasks. We both are conflict avoidant, so we really don't talk to each other about problems. And there's not much to talk about since we've been together for decades. So in people's own way, they are communicating to me that they're stuck in this place where they're just not able to hear each other. They're not able to convey what's really going on with themselves. There's just a very big universal challenge here. So the question they're really asking, I think, everyone, and way beyond my own practice, but couples in general are probably asking, how can we do this better? How can we communicate where we can be heard? How can I express myself in a way that you can hear me? You know, how can we convey what's going on for ourselves when we're not happy with the other person's actions or what they're saying in a way that we're not going to be hurting the person or getting hurt back? So these are messages that I get in terms of what people are really wanting to know more about. So I wanted to break down what communication really looks like, what two parts are. There's two parts to communication. I'm wondering if the viewers have thoughts about what would two parts be that communication is made of. And I'd like to leave it open to anyone who wants to take a guess, or what do you think? What are the two parts?
I mean, I think the two parts for me would be, you know, in the listening and then communicating. So like someone is expressing themselves and whatever their needs or wants may be, and then the other person is responsible for receiving that information, understanding, comprehending it, and doing something about it.
Exactly. So it's expressing and listening. And most everyone has trouble, probably with both, how to express ourselves so we could be heard, and how to listen so the partner could be heard, right? So I'm glad to be breaking this down, because I think it's really great for us to understand what's at the core of people's problems in relationship. It's so much to do with communication, the expressing of oneself and the listening. So one thing I would like to ask the viewers to consider as a question, and I just have it written down so I can remember it, would be in terms of expressing, do I express myself in a way that invites understanding, or do I express myself in a way that pushes my partner away? And I think that's a really great question for us all to ask ourselves. And I know that you, all of you and all of the couples I work with, are challenged around this in the beginning of our work together for sure, that we may not be expressing ourselves being our best selves. We're not being heard, and actually we have a responsibility to communicate in a way that we will be heard, which is something people don't even realize. They just sort of want to, put out what's going on for them and spit it all out or whatever, but actually it's our responsibility to communicate in a way that we can be heard. So that might be a new idea for some people, but it's really true. And the other is, with listening, do I listen to understand, or do I listen to reply? Because a lot of people, and I certainly have done this many times, we're more focused on what we want to say as the person's talking. So they may be talking about what they're not happy about us, right? Something that they're not happy about. And we might be thinking, yeah, well, you do all these things, and I didn't do that. Whatever it is, we're very busy in our own minds, and we're focused on wanting to express ourselves rather than listen to understand. Can you all relate to that? Mm-hmm. Right? This is something that we all do. And it's a wonderful idea to think about. We listen with our attention and focus. No matter what's going on inside us, we can put that aside. And we have to be self-aware that we're kind of cluttering up our mind and our listening skills by our own thoughts and feelings. But if we can just focus as we would want someone to focus on us, as to what is the message that's being conveyed to me. Mm-hmm. And that's something people generally don't know to do. Like, where do we learn about listening? So what I want to talk about now, or have you talk about, is one communication trap that is very prevalent, and we all can do this, and that is criticism. And I want to ask all of you, what are your thoughts about why do we criticize? Meaning, why is it so easy for all of us and everyone we know, and maybe everyone in the world, to actually use criticism as a way to communicate. Like, it's amazing, isn't it? How we're used to seeing it, we're used to doing it, we're used to being the recipient of criticism. So why is it so prevalent? What are your thoughts?
I mean, I think, criticism is something that we see every day. And a lot of us, especially myself, that was kind of a behavior correction when I was growing up from, parents and grandparents, that it was like, if you're doing X, you're lazy. If you're doing Y, you're a liar. If you're doing, so those kinds of things where you just grow up with it. And then it's very natural to be like, tell somebody like, you're such a slob or you're such a liar.
I think criticism, the criticizer doesn't need to be vulnerable. So I think when you're criticizing, you're not opening your emotional side up. You're kind of like throwing something. And I think that there's no vulnerability in criticism because it's like a defensive blame pattern thing where you're not exposing your inner emotions. You're able to just project what your need is in a way that doesn't require vulnerability.
Great point. Absolutely.
You helped me remember.
Oh, good.
When you're feeling something uncomfortable or anything along those lines that just doesn't feel good, it's really easy to put the blame on other people in the situation. I feel like especially your partner, because your lives are so intertwined that when you're feeling bad about something, it's just really easy to blame them and then not think before you speak and just say horrible things to them.
And also like maybe with the hope that they'll change the behavior next time. So maybe like part of criticism is making someone else feel bad in the hope that it conditions them to do something different next time.
Which will take away that bad feeling, but it never really does because it just triggers more pain between the two of you.
It kind of like puts the bad feeling on the other person. So like if I'm feeling bad and I say to Chris, I can't believe you didn't take the trash out last night. Maybe I feel better, but he feels worse.
Great points. And Christina, when you talked about how we feel bad, and we don't, and both of you were talking about we don't put out clear communication about exactly what's going on for us. Do you think it's often when we're hurt that we criticize? Someone says something that hurts us, and then we blame them and we make them wrong and bad instead of, as you mentioned, being vulnerable and saying, I'm really feeling hurt right now. That's a tough thing for people to say, do you think? Acknowledge that they're feeling hurt, reveal that? You think that's pretty tough for many people?
Yeah, I think that sometimes hurt disguises itself in other emotions. So I could be just feeling so angry, and underneath that I'm embarrassed, and underneath the embarrassment I'm hurt. Like there's layers to it, but usually when I break it down, now that I have more tools to slowing down and thinking about how I'm actually feeling before I speak, it usually comes down to hurt. I would say 9 out of 10 times.
And you're so right to mention anger, and that's going to be a whole nother show, or many, because anger is a big area that we get tripped up in, because at the heart of anger is generally, and maybe always, I don't know, vulnerable feelings that are riding along with the anger. It's the way we express our hurt, often, like you said, is through anger. We're angry because we're so hurt, and it's much better to reveal that we're hurt, because anger has its own energy, and with it can come a lot of judgment and criticism. So we will really move into that kind of discussion another time. But yes, anything else about why criticism is so, I don't want to say natural really, but it just seems to be so common, and I think it's universal that we just do that. So what are your thoughts?
I think you're right. It is like the most like natural mechanism of feeling bad, because you're like, as a human, you first think like, okay, something's wrong. It must be someone else. It's more emotionally mature thing to realize, like, okay, I feel bad, and to actually realize, like, why do I feel bad? Is it because of me? Is it the situation? It's not just immediately that person's fault. So that's like more of a mature thing to, it's like something you need to learn how to do, and that's why it seems so natural to just not do it that way, the more emotionally intelligent way.
It's almost like criticism is like the easy way out.
Yeah, exactly.
Or like regressing back into your child self when you would kind of just throw a tantrum because you didn't get your way. So you just kind of let that all out without taking the time to think about what's really going on.
And when we go right to anger, we're actually not usually thinking at that point. When we have strong emotion, we're not really in the part of the brain that can get us more in touch with thinking is not activated. The emotional brain is. So lots of ways that people don't have easy access to the vulnerable parts of them. And I wanted to read just a few things that I wrote down about why people criticize, along with what you've already said. They don't know how to express their emotions and needs clearly, and that's what you've been speaking to. People feel frustrated or unheard and lash out as a reaction. They assume that their partner should already understand them and their feelings. And they basically learn criticism as a communication style from family, other relationships. And I would go beyond that to ask you, where else do you think people learn that criticism is something you just do? It's kind of the norm. What are we exposed to that teaches us to criticize? What are your thoughts about that?
TV, maybe. Like shows that you watch, media that you consume.
It's a very normalized thing.
Yeah.
Yes, criticism is kind of normalized, like anger, because there's often anger with criticism. So anger is, that's not the problem, really. It's what's underneath anger that can be expressed, and it's that people generally express anger only. And along with that, like I said before, comes a lot of judgment and criticism and sometimes shaming and blaming.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and I liked when we talked about before, Christina, about when we were a kid, all we knew was like yelling or tantruming, whatever, and maybe there's a part in each of us that hasn't been able to mature to its fullest capacity in life as an adult, because we're still hooked back into reactive kinds of ways that we express ourselves, right? So maybe there's a maturity thing where we can all learn to mature into a better way to communicate, and it's so worth it. As I think you know, as couples who've been through a bit and you've come to the other side, which we'll go into later and hear a little bit more about your successes. So we're going to do an exercise. Okay, get ready.
Exercise.
So
did you bring weights?
No, but this is heavy.
Okay.
So these are examples of criticism. We all know what criticism is, but let's really drill down into like specific ways we criticize. And I have about 9 different ways. Did we know that there were 9 or more ways to criticize? Well, I did a little research, and just in my experience with couples and myself, whatever, I came up with 9 different ways that criticism gets expressed, right? So you'll be having the opportunity where one of you will be criticizing the other, and we're going to see the impact of that. Okay, so we just had a costume change, and what we're going to do is demonstrate different ways that criticism shows up. I'll be reading exactly the type of criticism, and then we'll be role-playing with one partner criticizing the other. And this is just a role play, it's not real at the moment. So why don't we start? And as you know, there's signs that say self-esteem. So they are each, Christina and Chris, the sign that they have is representing their self-esteem and what happens with their self-esteem as you're being criticized. Okay? So the first type of criticism are character attacks, attacking someone's character. And that's for you, Mariah, to start us off.
Chris, all you ever do is think about yourself. You're so selfish.
So he's ripping off a piece of self-esteem. Okay, the next one is using absolutes.
Christina, you always ignore me. You never listen.
Okay, judgmental statements are next.
What is wrong with you?
We don't have some happy campers here, do we? As we're being criticized here. The next is name-calling or belittling.
Tina, you're so clueless. How do you not get this?
Okay, going along here, there's mocking or sarcasm.
Oh my God, another broken promise? Shocking. You're so reliable.
Okay. Another that people may not even realize is diagnosing your partner.
Tina, you're so dramatic. Stop acting like a hypochondriac all the time.
Okay, a few more. The next is being condescending.
Of course you would think that.
And the next, which is pretty often, I would say, I hear about it, is yelling to overpower the person.
Tina, you're not listening to me.
Oh, that's a big grip.
Yes. And the last one that I have is shaming.
You know, Chris, you should really know better by now. How many times do we have to go through this?
Okay, so thank you for doing that interesting, unusual role play. Okay, what are your thoughts? I just want to open this up for a little discussion. What were your thoughts as the one criticizing, the one receiving criticism? You demonstrated what happens with self-esteem. You could talk about that for a minute. And also, when someone criticizes us, does it always have to affect our self-esteem? That's a really interesting question. But we demonstrated how it can, right? So we're up for discussion here, whatever your thoughts are, how it was for you in your roles.
I think what strikes me most about a lot of these methods of communication or miscommunication is that it's not effective in getting anything that you want out of it, right? Because you're essentially, when you're telling somebody they're a hypochondriac, like, what are you trying to change about them, right? And what are you trying to get out of that communication? So it doesn't help you get any further towards your goal, and you're really risking, hurting your partner for no real reason at the end of it, right?
I think something that stuck out to me was that there's like this underlying tone of shame with all of them. Like shame is the tool that you're weaponizing shame to try to condition your partner to feel something or do something differently.
I think what you might be saying is we're making them wrong or bad, right? Because that's what shame does. And when we shame ourselves, because a lot of us carry shame, we're doing that to ourselves. We're making ourselves wrong or bad or not good enough, not worthy. So I think that's a great point that kind of permeates through all criticism, most probably.
Well, with criticizing, like you're saying, you're making yourself right and you're making them wrong.
I love that.
It automatically, you're not working as like a team to like try to resolve anything. You're taking on the assumption of like my perspective or whatever it is correct, and you are the problem.
Yeah, and what struck me while we were going through this exercise is what feels most hurtful, I think, with these criticisms is that it usually goes against all the things we typically say when we're feeling good with each other and loving each other. So it kind of deteriorates the trust because I'm like, well, you always say this positive thing about me, and now you're saying this negative thing about me that makes it seem like you don't really feel that positive thing. So are you just lying, and this is really how you feel about me? And so it kind of creates anxiety and trust issues. Insecurity, yeah.
Trust is such an integral part of what's needed in a relationship, and when we criticize, it does fray that bond that is built on trust. So Yeah, we all have that experience of criticizing others. I mean, I think we all have done that, right? Mm-hmm. And you too, probably, and viewers. And also criticizing ourselves, of course. What kind of shape do we end up being in after we spend our time criticizing ourselves?
It's also like so dangerous because, you know, when we work with Amy, we talk a lot about like positivity bias and negativity bias. And the more often criticism comes up, the more you're tipping the scale towards negativity bias.
That's exactly
and
right.
You're acclimating to negative like energy and talk and framing and narratives in your relationship. And I think that's just a really dangerous place to be, because the more acclimated and more commonplace that it becomes, the more likely it is that the dynamic is like permanently shifted into like this negativity bias and negative patterns of communication.
Right, and negativity bias, we can see that as basically thinking more negatively about your partner than positively. So we develop through criticism, being criticized, and also dishing out criticism. Somehow we end up having this lens that we see the person through, which is a negativity lens, negativity bias. So thank you for that point. Mm. How was it for you to be in the role of criticizing?
Yeah, I mean, we like everything that we're talking about. It's so easy to see all the the problems of what I was saying in the moment. Like, clearly, that's not how I should be handling it. And you know, you're right now. I'm very self-aware, but it does take you back to moments where you're saying things like that and making these accusations and putting your partner down, and you realize like it's so easy to do that when you're in a fight or a scuff or whatever it is. But when you're like self-aware right now and calm and collected, it's so easy to see like this is not productive in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and I think going to off of what you said, Christina, where you do create those moments of, you know, hurt and self-doubt and issues with trust, right, is, you know, those people are just in a moment, right? And then you ask them immediately after, like, did you really mean that criticism? And it's like, of course not. Like, so, yeah. It's such a thing that happens in a moment, but it really can make somebody think about it for a long time.
Yeah, and I would echo that like as I was saying it, you know, it feels like such alien communication styles these days, because we've really practiced and like internalized like healthier communication styles. But as I was saying it, I was getting like some like minor flashbacks of like times that this has come up early on in our relationship or previously in our relationship, but also like to show how much implementing communication tools has worked. It felt really alien to revert back to that.
I'm wondering how it was for the recipient of the criticism. This was a role play, but how was that for you? You look pretty miserable, Chris.
Yeah, you know, it coming from Mariah, like she said, it feels alien. Right, because that's just not the kind of interaction that we have anymore, right? And it's not from, you know, becoming a better person. It's from familiarizing yourself with what those things sound like. And now that I haven't heard something like that from Mariah in a long time, you know, it is really alien, right? So it goes backwards. A lot of times your thoughts become speech, become actions. Mm-hmm. This way, when we're kind of modulating our speech, it's going backwards into thought. And so, yeah, I mean, it just kind of feels really odd to hear that from her. So,
Yeah, I feel a lot of the things both of you were saying. It kind of, like hearing some of those things, kind of took me back to times when we used to communicate similar or along the lines as this, and just how much pain it caused both of us. Like, we really didn't get anywhere. We just added so much to the hurt, and now that we know that criticism is just hurtful and doesn't do anything, I can hear it in lots of conversations, like even outside of our relationship. I feel like I hear criticism everywhere, and it just sounds to me like I want to correct it, and I want to correct everyone, and which I don't, but I want to be like, wait, there's a better way. There's a better way to say how you feel.
You know, as you're talking, I'm realizing, I guess I want to put this into a question. does criticism really need to affect our self-esteem? What you represented here by this little role play was particularly a child being criticized. Their self-esteem is shaped through the parenting that they receive and what's around them in their environment. They don't have a lot of control over what happens to them and how to process it. But as adults, we can love ourselves, accept ourselves, like ourselves enough where we can think that's their problem, that they're communicating in a way that's destructive. I do not have to buy into it. What are your thoughts about that? Because it is hurtful to be criticized. Does it need to be hurtful? What are your thoughts about that, like where you are in life now with yourself, or just in general about the idea of criticism impacting self-esteem?
No matter what, there's always going to be like a little bit of hurt. Like even if I can like sit back and pause, I think one of the biggest tools that is good to use when someone's criticizing is to identify the lens that they're seeing things through. So like I can say like, Chris had a really bad day. So if I can separate the criticism from my action and attribute the criticism to what he's going through, then it's less likely to impact my self-esteem.
That's really like being mindful, like being aware of where the other person's truly coming from, not taking it personally. Mm-hmm. Right.
I would agree, though. It is always like really, really hard, and it's one thing when it's just someone, you're in the streets and they criticize you. It doesn't really matter. But when it's your partner that's criticizing you, that's when it's really, really hard, because if they're saying there's something wrong about you, that shakes your relationship down to its core, because this is the most important person in your life, and they already signed up for everything that you are, So if now they're saying, "Oh, you're wrong," it's like that's shaking everything. But what you said is true too. Is like life is complicated. We go through hard times. This is just you're anxious. I understand. You didn't really mean that. So you can let it roll off of you. But when it is your partner and your relationship, it is a lot harder.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you were talking about the child self, I was thinking about when actual children, like, say something hurtful or insult you in some way, and you, like, a part of you knows, like, okay, they're just little and they don't know what they're saying yet, and they're just acting out of their feelings. But sometimes that hurts a little bit too, and, like, you take it a little bit personally, even though, they're little. So I think it's the same thing with your partner. Like, you can look at it like, okay, they're like reverting back to their child self right now, and they're hurting, and that's why they're saying it like this. But I think it's really easy when your partner is kind of in touch with his child self, or when either of us are in touch with our child self, it makes the other one kind of go into their child self, and then it's just like the two children fighting with each other. At least that can happen unless someone decides to be mature and start using better communicating tools.
Here and then I was thinking it's sort of like two adults tantruming. They're coming from that child part of them, and they're not using more mature language. Yeah.
It is such a trap, and like Chris and I have often gotten into situations where we catch ourselves in that trap. And like one of us will pause. Actually, this morning, I hope you don't mind me sharing, Chris like came in and he was like, "Can we start over?" Like we started, like I could sense the tension building. It only lasted a couple minutes. We said a couple like kind of like edgy things to one another, and then he was like, "Can we start over?" And it was like the most meaningful part of my day.
Oh,
yeah.
That is such a wonderful skill. When we find ourselves, say, criticizing, we can stop right there as we notice. And we could say, let me start over. I'm sorry I found myself criticizing, right? So sometimes we can start over in the moment when we're actually criticizing, or sometimes we can know that it's almost coming out and we can kind of just tune in and change, realizing that there's an option there. Because a lot of times we don't think there are options other than what is going to blast out of us. But being mindful with the person we love, we really want to treat them with kindness. Ultimately, that's why I believe all people are really good inside. They just act badly. badly, in quotes.
We've had a lot of situations like that where you do catch yourself criticizing, and then you get to the point where it's like, okay, wait, let's start over. And that's the thing, it's not even like it's an immediate thing. You'll be like, okay, I need to reframe how I said this, and you'll try a few times until you actually are able to say it, because like, we'll be saying something and you'll use like, you did this. It's like, nope, try again. And then you keep doing that over and over again until you actually expressed what you needed, what's going on, and how to actually resolve the situation. And it takes a little bit of time, but yeah, it comes back to like reframing what you wanted out of the conversation and just like good communication skills.
I love the idea though that like there's an option.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't have, like just because you've started to get into like a little bit of a bicker, a little bit of a fight, it doesn't mean it has to continue. Like anyone can stop at any time. There is an option to like start over. And it doesn't have to be a 2 or 3 hour and all day thing. Yeah. It can literally like, there's always an option to shift the energy. And like, as soon as Chris said that to me today, we were like totally fine. It was like 1,000, like, yeah, I would love to start over. And like, it was totally fine. So we can choose whether to like live in that 2 children like arguing with each other, like that trap, or to step out of it, break out of it, and start over, which I love the idea of the option.
And he caught himself.
Well, he caught both of us.
Both of you.
Yeah, because it wasn't just him this morning, it was me too. But him initiating the conversation of let's start over was enough for me to just like let it all go, and like
so wonderful.
It was really wonderful, yeah.
Something that's really helped us, and it took time for us to get to this point, is now when we know, either one of us knows that we can't communicate effectively because we feel too emotional about the situation, we'll take a little bit of space. And that took time because in the past, space would create more pain because we would keep coming back to the same patterns. But now we know, like, okay, we both know how to communicate effectively. We just need a little bit of space to cool down, and then we'll come back to this conversation when we're ready to. And we usually don't need to take space for very long. It's just a little bit of time to take a breath and then come back and say what needs to be said.
Yeah, and really find another way to really put out what we really mean. And that takes me to the next question, which is, and what is it that is the truth underneath criticism, which is the name of this show today? There's really 2 things that criticism is kind of masking. It's not letting you really know that the person criticizing is actually wanting to communicate these 2 things. Christina, what would you say those are?
Feelings and needs.
That's exactly right, and that's what you've all learned, right? And that's really the heart of communication when we're not happy. When we're not happy with what our partner does or says, we may lash out in criticism just like that, when actually we need to maybe take a break. We need to maybe automatically, after a while you can automatically kind of realize, I'm really hurt here, I'm really needing more understanding, or whatever it is. So there's a formula that is very much at the core of the work I do with couples, and that I've done with both of you couples. And I'm wondering if we can talk about that, and I just want to introduce the viewers to the formula, and first say that it might be odd and different to think of a formula to infuse into your communication, but since criticism doesn't really work, maybe this formula will, because basically it does. When you, and then it's either when you say, come in the door without saying hello to me. It could also be when I see that you're coming through the door and not saying hello to me. So either of those is the beginning. The next part is I end up feeling, or I find myself feeling. So it's I feel. So how do you actually feel about not being greeted at the door? I'm just using that as an example. And then the third is because what I'm really needing, what I'm really wanting. And that might be in this example, I'm really wanting connection and closeness at the end of the day with you. And then we get to ask a request, which is not a demand, like you better, I really want you to do this. No, it's would you be willing to Would you be willing to let me know what's going on for you when you come home where you don't really feel like saying hi? Or would you be willing, and this would be like a behavior change we're asking for, would you be willing to greet me for a few minutes when you come home? And it's amazing because the results I've seen it's astounding. Usually people say yes to the request. It's really remarkable. This is taken from Marshall Rosenberg. His work is about nonviolent communication. He coined that phrase. He uses and he developed this formula, and it's being taught all over the world, nonviolent communication, and that's very much at the heart of what I bring to my couples is nonviolent communication. And this formula is nonviolent, meaning, because words could be violent, meaning they're kind, they're honest, they're clear, they're authentic. So I'm wondering what your experiences are with the formula. This is pretty much when we're now coming to the closing part of our time together. And I would love to hear maybe what you used to do, what you do now using the formula. Like, feel free to share anything. That would be really great for us to hear, because I know there's a big difference from when I first met you and what you've done since then. And the formula is something that I absolutely, I teach, I support, I'm all about it. And I just love to hear from you.
I love the formula. I'm obsessed with the formula because it really does work, and it's really awkward at first. Like, honestly, when you first start doing it, it does feel really awkward and uncomfortable and like a formula, like you're trying to say this new weird way of talking, but it becomes really natural the more you practice it, and you really do get the results you're looking for. You get to say how you feel, you get to say what is hurting you, what you're upset about, you get to acknowledge your needs, and then you ask for a solution, and you actually find a way to work through it. And so when I say, like, our communication tools, like all throughout our time here together today, whenever I'd mention the things we've learned, I feel like a lot of it is from the 4-part formula.
Yeah, it is like you said, like really awkward to integrate at first. I remember like when we were first learning it, and it's like we were saying, you get the heat of the moment, and you get your emotions raised. And initially, I know I was like, all right, screw the formula. Like, don't try to tell me to use the stupid thing. I'm pissed off right now.
You get prideful, and you don't want to do it. But if you can work through
when
that,
you flex those muscles by using it, you're no longer like begrudgingly using this thing, because you realize like, oh, I've used this in the past, and it like, it really worked. It eased the situation. I could perfectly express what I needed from you or you from me, and it just worked. So you're no longer like forcing it. It kind of just comes way more naturally.
yeah, and then it becomes like part of your regular communication. Like, this is how I talk to you now.
And it's like developing a culture between you as a couple where it's okay to use this formula because it works, so why not? So I think that using it at first is a very odd and different kind of thing to do. And plus, when we're at our worst, meaning we're triggered, we're activated, which means we have big reactions to the other person, it's probably the last thing on our mind to use the formula, right? And that's where we stretch even more to try to incorporate the formula into our mindset so that we can access it at the hardest times. And that takes practice. Would either of you be willing to share a time when you can remember using it and actually what you said? I don't know if you can bring anything to mind, but that would be great to hear.
Pick me from the airport.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I picked Sky up from the airport the other day, and I acknowledged that I was feeling,
Upset with me.
well, I was kind of expecting, we hadn't seen each other for several days, and I just...
Something we've done. I've gotten so mad at him sometimes.
Yeah, and I just, like, really wanted us to just embrace each other and love each other. And of course we did for a moment, but he was feeling pretty anxious about, just
tired, jet lag, and everything.
Yeah, just tired, anxious, and so he wasn't really in the headspace to be like lovey-dovey. So, instead of blaming him for it, I just let him know how I was feeling and what my needs were in that moment, and asked if he could show me some affection, and he did.
How wonderful.
Yeah.
And what's amazing about the formula is it could take half a minute or 2 minutes, whatever, such a short amount of time, instead of harboring those feelings of hurt, maybe criticizing, maybe not mentioning anything, but maybe withdrawing. Yeah. And that can last for hours or days or more, right?
Yeah.
So that's a great example
right.
of right there in the moment to share, and then you get what you need and feel better. And he knows what you needed, and he honored it because he loves you. Good job. What would you like to say about the formula and how it's worked?
Well, I think for me, it kind of comes down to, and I've been thinking about this, as we're talking, these three things, right? Which is one, it's like the most reliable form of diplomacy that we have, right? I can't emphasize enough how you guys were saying it works, right? So if I want to get myself on the other side of this argument, right, I know I can rely on the formula to get me there, right? To cut all the crap and get to what the core of the behavior that I'm feeling a certain way about, or where is the request? And so that's the second time, right? The second thing is understanding what the request is, taking the time to work through the formula mentally before it ever comes out of my mouth, and that gives me time to really organize my thoughts and understand exactly what it is I'm needing in that moment. And that's been a really big thing for me, because it's become one of those things where you sometimes it'll stop you from saying anything, because you realize the thing that I'm asking for, there is no request at the end of it, right? It's not a reasonable thing that I'm asking for. So this is just not, this isn't something that I should bring up. I should just let it go. And then the third thing about it is, that culture that you were talking about, that it creates between partners, right? And it goes back to what we were talking about, where I asked to start over, right? And you can't just, in any relationship, you can't just ask to start over, right? But when we've established that trust, where we know the formula that we're using, we know that we're looking to address our feelings and our needs rather than address the last grievance, right? Then I am able to ask, can we start over? And it's understood, we haven't been doing this right, so let's start over at the beginning, and we can move through this the way that we're supposed to, right? So yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes you don't even need to move through it. The things that we were bickering a little bit about this morning were dumb things. I was I said something that implied I can't believe you didn't get in the shower yet. Yeah. And so sometimes starting over means you don't even need to keep going with the previous thing. You just start over. But what I was thinking about was my pattern, and it's still my pattern that I'm working on, is rather than using the formula, I internalize and get resentful. And I get so incredibly resentful that it gets to the point where he's sleeping next to me and he'll snore, and I'm I can't believe you, and all this pent up resentment. So what the formula allows me to do is, rather than internalize, withdraw, and get resentful, is to express to him how I'm feeling and then make a request. And usually, like you said, that request is met immediately with a yes. So the resentment flies out the window, because there's nothing to be resentful about anymore. But if I don't do that, I'm liable to keep my mouth shut, get resentful, internalize, and build a case against him until that case explodes into me really being angry about something.
You got it.
I'm a little opposite of that, where I always say everything that I feel. And, so I can relate to Chris sometimes now when I do the formula in my head before I even say anything. I realize that it's something I don't need to share because it's something I can work through myself. Like, I'm just feeling bad inside myself, and it actually has nothing to do with Sky. So I don't need to even express these things, and I can work through it myself.
Yeah, and I love what Chris said about like reasonable requests. So like we were in a session with Amy probably like a month ago, and we were saying like, one of the questions was what can the person, like your partner, do in the upcoming week? And Chris caught himself. He was like, keep like something along the lines of like not overworking, because like I tend to be at work a lot at night. And he was like, wait a second, I can't really ask that of you. Like that's not really reasonable. So I think like moving through the formula in your head and coming to the point of like, would you be willing to? And if you say that a lot in your head, like, would you be willing to work less or something, and it doesn't seem reasonable, then that's like a good starting point too.
And the wonderful thing about the formula is that it provides us a way to self-connect, and it puts the light on what's going on in us internally. So instead of the blame is really focusing on the other, the accusing, the criticizing, all that, that's really focused on the person doing something wrong. Maybe the person did do something that's not great, right? They make mistakes, or somehow they just didn't treat us well. But we need to really focus on what's going on in us. And that's what the formula has us doing. And there's no criticism in the formula. It's kind. It really is kind. And it's actually a way to love ourselves, because we can embrace our feelings and needs. And many people don't think about, what am I really feeling? They don't think about, I think it's related to some needs that aren't being met. But that's what I like to bring to the work with couples, and that's what nonviolent communication in general is all about, is learning to connect with our inner self and revealing that in the most kind way. So it kind of works for us to use the formula, that we get to kind of move criticism away and kind of look at the formula. There's magnets that I give people for their refrigerators or whatever of the formula. We can actually look at it and decide what we want to say to the person.
Yeah, for me, like I'm very opposite Christina. Like I will never say how I'm feeling. So instead of using the formula as some like way to like reformat what I'm saying, which I obviously have done, but it's a lot to what you're saying, where it shines a light. It's like, okay, what do I actually want? And like getting in touch with your needs, and because you can subconsciously resent someone. Like I know, like Christina will be doing something, and I'll be like, oh, I don't like that. Why don't I like that? And then that's where I can actually take the time to turn inward and figure out, like, what do I actually want? What do I actually need? And so it allows me to, the formula allows me to communicate with Christina in ways that I would normally just stay silent and not say anything. So it's been a big help.
I think like the best part is that you get to make a request, which is something that like societally we don't do. It's not like normalized to like make a request of your partner so vulnerably, and it really leaves you in the solution and not in the problem by the end of the formula.
Great way to say it. This is very solution oriented. Yeah. I was just wondering, how is it for the men here to start to speak about your feelings and needs more than maybe generally men are encouraged to do? Like, was this a big risk or growth edge for you to actually embrace your feelings, say what they are, the more vulnerable feelings? A lot of times men and women, but many times I notice men are more prone to share anger first, and it's very hard for them to dig deep into what's really going on, which is often hurt, sadness, maybe jealousy, all kinds of things like that. So what's been your experience with the realm of feelings and needs as a male?
I mean, I think for me, it's what's necessary for the right communication, right? So if I'm not willing to open up and say anything, right, it's often vulnerability is met with vulnerability, right? When you put out that hand, right, you're always fearful that it won't be met with another hand, right? But in your partnership, there's that trust, that respect, that you're able to understand that I need to share my feeling and my need, because that's part of the way that we effectively communicate.
Great point.
Yeah.
It softens the other when you're vulnerable. It brings them closer to you, right? What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, what you're speaking is as like a guy and a more like typical guy, like a very quiet, and Christina's always been the one that has like very strong communication skills, and she'll take like the reins on all of those things and ironing out things for us. But it really has allowed me to focus on not the anger like, oh, you're doing something wrong and I'm right because you're doing the thing that's wrong. And the formula removes any right and wrong. There is no right and wrong. There should never be a right and wrong in a relationship. It's, I have these needs, you have these needs, let's figure out how to meet both of them. And so it's definitely allowed me to reflect more on that, get in touch more with that, and be able to share all of those things with Tina. And I'm not very good at it. Still working on it a lot.
You've gotten so much better.
It's definitely a work in progress, but yeah, it's definitely improved a lot.
So I have 2 quotes that I just want to read that sums up a lot of what's been talked about. Communication is at the heart of every relationship. We can replace criticism by using the formula. We express our feelings and needs using the formula and including requests, all in a kind way. This moves the relationship forward and builds a stronger connection, resulting in a thriving relationship. We don't want a stuck relationship, right? We don't want it to be stale. We don't want to have anger be so prevalent and just driving each other away. We want a thriving relationship. And then the other quote is, if you do not communicate in a way that evolves your relationship through mutual understanding, then over time you will find that you grow apart. Understanding your partner's inner world and having them understand yours is pivotal to true connection. Right? So I kind of put those quotes together based on what, some things I've read, what I know, whatever, but I thought that would really summarize what we're doing here. And before we close, I was wondering if there's anything any of you would like to just say, and just any closing statements?
I would just say that Chris and I are so appreciative to you.
Oh.
You've really had such a transformative impact in our relationship, and like your wisdom and gentleness and like empathy and like attentiveness has really like impacted and probably changed like the trajectory of our patterns between each other. So we really appreciate it.
So nice.
100% agree. Yeah.
I wasn't asking them to say that. Thank you.
Yeah.
So anything that you'd like to say about what the topic, anything?
I was just thinking when you were reading that quote, I've been reflecting on the word connection, and I think there's a lot of stigma about being in couples therapy, like that it seems like, oh, you have a bad relationship or something like that, but I feel totally different. I think that all couples could benefit from couples therapy because I think we all struggle at times with connection and finding deeper connection, because a lot of times we even struggle to connect with ourselves, let alone with another person. So I think couples therapy just allows you to explore that connection and deepen that connection, and that's definitely been the case for us. And yeah, we feel the same way. You've been amazing. You're the best.
Goodness.
You're the absolute best. We love you.
Oh.
Thank you for having us.
Well, I appreciate how bold, courageous, brilliant, being self-disclosing. I don't know if I'd want to be on a show. Well, I am on one, right? But I thought, for you to reveal a lot more about your personal lives, I just think that's an incredible step to take, and it's been a joy to work with you, and this show has been great.
I learned what criticism looks like and how it may not be effective, and also a tool that you can use instead of criticism to to be communicative about your needs and your feelings. And also, I just was able to watch couples. I kind of feel like I make fun of therapy language a little bit and people who use it, but it's really interesting to be able to see couples like with that skill use that language effectively and clearly be able to talk about how that has changed their relationship. It was really valuable to me. So that is the end of our show. If you would like to leave a comment or get on future shows, you can reach out to Amy at
coachingbyamy.com. And I have a website if you'd like to explore more about what I offer. It's www.coachingbyamy.com.
Amazing. And we're going to try to do the show monthly. And you have a monthly column also that's available in the Recorder and the Gazette. So there is lots of Amy out there. You've done it for 3 years, so you can read a bunch of great columns. Thanks for watching.